This is the Anxiety Recovery Mindset Podcast. Greetings and welcome to episode 1 of the Anxiety Recovery Mindset Podcast, aka the ARM Podcast. My name's Bryan. I am the author of the book by the same title, and I will be hosting this podcast. So for episode 1, I had big plans. I recorded a long podcast. I edited things together, really tried to stay organized and present something that would make sense for a first-time listener of the show and maybe someone who read the book as well. I've since changed my mind and we are just going to wing it. I figure this is what we're generally going to do going forward anyway. We're going to get on here. We're going to talk. I'm going to try to answer questions. I'm going to ask questions. I don't have all the answers. That's part of the beauty of this is we are going to attempt to go through this and learn together and draw the information out of this topic together the best that we can. So with that said, what I decided to do instead of a structured podcast for this first episode here was more of an introductory show. And this would be a chance for me to cover some topics that I think people might want to hear about early on. In particular, it's probably a good idea to start with some basic questions about why we're doing this, what we're going to be covering. How did I even end up in a position to want to do a podcast? I'll try to cover as many of these things as I can early on, but I thought the goal that would be best for the first show here is to give you a reason to want to come back for the next one. I'd like to build some engagement through this because this is really about the listener, what you may be going through, what you may have been through, and the steps that you can take to find your way out of this thing. And by this thing, I mean anxiety disorder, stress disorder, panic, anything you may be going through at the moment. We're going to try to cover a little bit of all of it. I know what my history with this has been, but I want to learn about yours. And really, this is going to be driven by what the needs are out there. The reason I wrote the book was partially because I felt like there was such a lack of good quality information. When I was first going through this, it was a while ago. Doesn't seem like things should be that different, but even if you go back 10 years or so, the access to information back then was so different than it is now. There were far fewer things like YouTube channels, less good books. There was certainly no AI that anyone was using reliably to kind of aggregate information or data on any of this. So it was really a different time. And that forced me to do a lot of research on my own. And doing that research, I would not recommend for most people. It probably did me more harm than good in a lot of ways. But one thing that did come out of it was this deep understanding of what people go through. Some of the science behind this, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to claim to be. I won't spend a lot of time in scientific neighborhoods, but there are some basic concepts that I feel comfortable enough discussing. I'll disclaim everything and let you know I'm not a doctor. None of the things you're going to hear on this show are going to be medical advice. And in fact, we're going to cover how to clear yourself early on if you're going through some of this, as that's a very important step. So I thought it might be good to sort of reverse engineer this first show, meaning I will answer questions that you haven't asked yet. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to guess. I'm going to take a bit of a look around, and I'm going to draw from my history of knowing what kinds of questions people generally want to know early on. I'll talk some specifically about this podcast in the book, and then we'll get into some actual meat and potatoes anxiety type issues, and we'll try to lay the groundwork for future shows. I've got a lot of good ideas. I've got a lot of ideas I think that could be very helpful and even a little fun. So with that said, let's dive into a few of these questions and give a little background and a little setup for what might be coming on future shows. And we'll start with what I'm calling question number 1. What is this podcast about? Well, the title gives it away a bit, but I'm hoping to do something a little bit different with this show. I'd like to approach some of these topics from a different angle. There's a lot of information out there, and this is going to be a theme that you hear me repeat over and over, whether it's about podcasts, whether it's about YouTube or books, anything, even to some extent what we're taught in school about this topic. There's a lot of information out there. You'll hear me refer to it as noise. In fact, the subtitle of the book is Cut Through the Noise, and you can see on the front page there's a figure there, and the person is holding their ears, sort of blocking the noise out. That is of course, indicative of what I feel it's like to be suffering from anxiety and having so much coming at you from so many directions. You can see that the figure is covering their ears. You see what looks like the beginning of a peaceful state. And I think for me, that was when things started to settle down, when I was able to break through all of these different protocols and methods and hacks and opinions. And then you have doctors pulling you one way, friends, concerned relatives, people who love you pulling you another way. It's very difficult, and there are not a lot of solid foundational structures that really teach similar proven strategies. Things that people have gone through that you can find recovered people who say, this worked for me. You can find a lot of people out there that say they got some relief from doing this or some relief from doing that. They tried an exercise, they took a medication, they took a supplement. Most of these things are temporary, and none of them seem to be consistent. As it turns out, there are some consistent things that you can find among people who have recovered, and that's what we're going to try to discuss on this show primarily. The focus of everything we do is going to be pulling that information together, putting it in one place for you, and giving you a structure to follow and a mindset to put yourself into that you can practice consistently that has proven results. These things were drawn from people who have recovered. One of the most consistent things you're going to hear on this show, in the book, in anything that I'm associated with, is I want to use proven techniques. This is what I wanted to know when I was going through this. I didn't want opinions. I wanted to know what worked, and I wanted to hear it from people who implemented those things themselves. Personally, for me, I needed those things to be natural because that's the course that I was going to follow. And this show, the book, it will be about natural methods. So if you're looking for something that involves medications or some other sort of protocol, that's not what I'm going to be doing here. And I wish you luck. But if you are interested in doing this work on your own and trying to find organic and natural ways through this, they do exist. They are real. And that's what we're going to be doing here on this show. So to wrap up the question number one, why are we doing this? I went through a very long struggle, longer than I needed to. I got to a good place finally. I'm very happy about that. And so much of what I learned was passed on to me, in fact, most of it, from people who were not doctors. They were not scholars or writers or therapists. Nothing wrong with any of those people, by the way. Some of them are giving great advice on the topic. But I found in my experience, it was the day-to-day living, the day-to-day habits of the everyman, the person who was just like me, working a regular job with a family, and they found their way out of it by doing the right research, ending up in the right place. And a consistent theme among those people was that they were always willing to share it. And I thought that was so great that these people were passing down this information that really could be lost in the noise that was out there if they wouldn't have done so. And not everybody wants to hear that information. Lots of people don't want to do this work. This is hard work. It does take commitment, and it's often not instant. So I think for a lot of people, you have to get to a place where you've tried things and they didn't work and you are ready to commit to something real and long-term. That's what this book was about for me. That's what this podcast is about for me. It's about passing that information on and doing the same thing for others that people did for me. Hopefully, I can be a little voice in a sea of information out there and help with the preservation of this information for the next generation who may be going through anxiety, panic, stress disorder. These things aren't going away. They seem to be increasing societally. So it's more important than ever, in my opinion, that we retain this knowledge in the public sphere however we can. So if I can play a little role in that, I'm happy to do so. Moving on to question 2. Who is this podcast for? Well, it's for the same people that I had in mind when I wrote the book. And of course, when people write on subjects like this, it's usually informed by their own past, by their own experiences. I'll definitely be discussing what I went through, as in a way, it's a model for what not to do. I think my journey through this experience can be very informative for those who are at the beginning or maybe have gone through this for a while, are looking for answers and just can't quite seem to land in a place they're comfortable with. I spent far too long looking for good information on this subject, and I have real sympathy for anyone trying to do the same right now. So in that sense, this book is for anyone experiencing disorder-level anxiety. It's for anyone struggling with their day-to-day life, and anxiety can be defined in so many ways, but for this show, for the purposes of what we're doing, the kind of anxiety we're talking about here is the kind that interferes with your life. We're not talking about worrying about bills or your job or family issues. Those are worry issues. They can certainly produce a level of anxiety, and we all have those. They're very important, and there's probably a lot of great podcasts out there that cover those things. What we're talking about here is finding hope for people who are in a bad place, and that can range from being afraid to leave the house to wondering if they can keep their job. It can be people who are in a place of real fear every day. People wake up with panic, with anxiety. This can be a terrifying condition. I remember what that's like. I haven't forgotten it. And I want this to be a place that we can have honest conversation about what's going on in the day-to-day lives of people who struggle with this condition. And not just talk about it to commiserate. Certainly, we will try to be supportive on this show and in the book and anything else we do. But this is going to be a results-oriented podcast, at least the attempts. The things we do are all going to be aimed at finding answers and solutions. I feel like a lot of the information out there, a lot of the channels, the podcasts, the books, these things are often about managing anxiety, about learning to live in the state that you're in. And to some degree, we do have to do that. To some degree, we do need to learn to function and exist in a state of heightened anxiety. But while we're doing that, we should be employing methods, mindset work, day-to-day behaviors that lead us away from that state. These two things can be done congruently. In fact, they work very well together. But the goal has to be clear, and the mindset to make this happen is very specific. It's nuanced, it's simple, but it is very specific. The process of moving through this condition contains so many small details, it's very easy to miss one here or there and really continue to perpetuate a state by not changing these behaviors. So again, everything we try to do here will be based on changing behavior, changing mindset, changing viewpoint, and leading people into a place where they're having a better life because of these changes. So that might mean this won't always feel good. The things we talk about won't always just be feel-good topics. Occasionally, we will have to ask difficult things of ourselves to move forward. That's what we're going to be doing here. I hope that's why you're here and what you'd like to hear. That doesn't mean it's always going to be difficult. I do think that learning this information in and of itself provides a certain comfort and a certain reassurance. Just having a plan, just understanding that your day-to-day actions are leading you to a better place, that is reassuring, and it is a place we can all get to. As I've said, it takes a lot of work. Some people will have a much easier time with this. Others may need more time. I was stubborn. I needed a lot of time. Most of you will probably do better than I did, but it's not a contest. We can all end up in the same place, and this podcast is geared towards anyone struggling with their day-to-day life due to anxiety, due to panic, any of the conditions, obsessive thoughts, depersonalization, any symptom you want to name. We can identify most of these as being a result of sensitization of the nervous system, anxiety. I'm using as a general umbrella. So we plan to include anyone who's going through these conditions who can identify that as different as what they feel may seem, it actually does live under this same umbrella as anxiety, panic, sensitized nervous system. These are all things we're going to discuss. So if any of that sounds like you, please stick around for future podcasts. We also have the book on Amazon. I'll give the link to that later. But I think if you hear yourself in those descriptions, you will find this podcast to be helpful in the future. So I hope you tune back in. So for question 3, I thought it might be fun to ask, why should I listen to you? That's a good question. Why should you listen to me? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I could understand if somebody turned on this podcast and wondered, who is this and why do they feel like they have the ability to give someone advice on how to recover? Well, I think the answer to that for me goes back to what I said before. Most of the information that I found the most useful on this topic came from people who were not professionals. Again, nothing against people who do this professionally. Some of them have actually helped me out and taught me a lot. I have worked with therapists who did help me. But there's something about having the lived experience of having gone through this that makes the information feel real. That was my experience when I learned from people. It was always apparent to me when someone had been through this. They didn't learn it in a textbook. They lived it, they experienced it. You cannot fake that, you can't manufacture it. You either experienced this or you didn't. And most of us would not have ever known what this could be like before we did. Before I experienced what I called a nervous breakdown at the time, I would have had no idea that the human body was capable of any of this, not to mention the brain. When I heard people talk about anxiety before I had my breakdown, I always assumed they were talking about worry, as we mentioned before. I thought they probably just needed to relax, they needed to find better coping mechanisms. I certainly would not have had the kind of sympathy that I have for anyone now having gone through this. And not only did I go through this, but I went through it for a decade. You don't have to go through it for a decade, so don't let that scare you when you hear me say it. I told you I was stubborn. I took the long way out of this, and it took me a long time to find the right information. But I did learn a lot in that time. I studied a lot. I did a lot of research, and I do feel comfortable sitting in a room with someone who is a doctor, with someone who is a therapist, and discussing this condition. I feel like my general set of knowledge on this is more than adequate for me to offer people advice on something that I've gone through, had experience overcoming, and talked to and worked with countless people and heard their stories. You can read about them in the book. There's a whole chapter in the book dedicated to people. It's called From the Recovered. These are people who just give quotes and blurbs and thoughts. So I've gone deep into this topic for a very long time. I do have a lot of opinions about it. It doesn't mean they're all right, but I'm not shy about sharing them. I want to help people who want this kind of information. Some people won't, and that's okay too. So in truth, there's no reason you have to listen to me any more than you have to listen to anybody else. But I might make the case that a good reason to check out this show and the book is that we are going to be approaching things from a different angle. It's going to be from real lived experience, and it's going to be information that I know does work, that I've seen work with regular people. I feel like I've become a bit of a human search engine on this topic, and I hope that what I've learned can be useful to you and that you will give it a chance to make an impact in your own life the way this information made an impact in mine. So we answered a few questions here that hopefully give you an idea of what the show is going to be about. I hope it provides enough reason for you to want to stick around and come back and check out the next one. I promise you it's going to get more interesting as we go on. I know today was a bit general, but we will be getting more granular in the future, I guarantee you that. And one thing that would really help is if I could hear from you and you let me know what you'd like to hear on this show. You can get in touch with the show by visiting the website and checking out the link there. The website is theanxietyrecoverymindset.com, or you can email me directly at brian@theanxietyrecoverymindset.com. Drop us a line, let us know what you'd like to hear. Feel free to ask questions or give any suggestions you have, and we'll definitely be making room to answer some questions from you on future shows. So please, feel free to reach out. The show is about you. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for now. Thanks for listening to this babbling first episode. I promise you things will get tighter going forward. Please check in next time, and until then, take care.